When Benjamin Harris rolled into Brightview Solutions, the air buzzed with ambition and nervous energy. No one knew that the quiet man in the wheelchair wasn't really Larry Simmons, a junior analyst hopeful. He was the new CEO on a secret mission. He wasn't there to land a job. He was there to expose the truth hiding behind the company's polished image. Brightview Solutions was on the brink of a new era. The company, a tech giant experiencing explosive growth, had just appointed Benjamin Harris as its new CEO. But Benjamin wasn't one to make assumptions from behind a desk. Before he officially stepped into his role, he had one goal: to see the real culture at Brightview. He wanted to understand the true character of his managers, the ones tasked with hiring and shaping the future of the company. Benjamin knew prejudice often hid behind polished smiles and professional veneers. He'd faced it himself more times than he cared to remember, but he wanted to witness it firsthand within Brightview's walls, unfiltered and raw. So he came up with a plan. On the company's quarterly hiring day, Benjamin transformed into Larry Simmons, an applicant for a junior data analyst position. He donned a simple suit, rolled into a wheelchair, and blended into the sea of hopeful candidates flooding the lobby. The room buzzed with energy, resumes clutched tightly, nervous glances exchanged. Benjamin maneuvered quietly to the waiting area, observing everything. HR staff stood scattered around, chatting and laughing, oblivious to the man in the wheelchair silently watching. "Mr. Simmons," a voice called. It was Cheryl Dixon, the HR manager in charge of the day's interviews. Tall, sharp-eyed, and exuding a practiced authority, Cheryl scanned the room until her gaze landed on Benjamin. Her eyes flickered with surprise before settling into something colder. "You're Mr. Simmons?" Her tone carried disbelief. Benjamin nodded, extending his hand politely. Cheryl's eyes darted to it, but didn't reach out. She kept her arms crossed, lips curling into a faint smirk. "You're here for the data analyst position?" she asked, voice dripping with skepticism. "Yes, ma'am," Benjamin replied, calm and steady. Cheryl's gaze dropped to the wheelchair, her smile turning sour. "You're joking, right?" she said, loud enough for nearby applicants to hear. A few shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged uneasy glances. "A data analyst? Do you even know what that entails?" Her voice was sharp, each word a subtle dagger. Benjamin met her stare, unfazed. "I have the skills and experience necessary for the role." "Oh, do you now?" Her eyebrows arched. "Brightview Solutions isn't, well, it's not exactly a place for people with, She paused, her smile tight. Limitations." The word hung in the air like poison. "We need people who can keep up. This is a fast-pacing environment. We can't afford dead weight." Around them, other candidates avoided eye contact, pretending not to hear. Some whispered to each other, clearly uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. No one challenged her. Cheryl continued, her voice a relentless barrage of condescension. Each comment dripped with assumption. Every glance reinforced her bias. She didn't see Benjamin's calm demeanor. She saw only the wheelchair. Benjamin sat quietly, taking mental notes. Every word, every sneer. He recorded it all. Inside, he felt the weight of her ignorance, but he kept his expression neutral. "Let's not waste anyone's time," Cheryl finally said, her tone final. "Why don't you head on out? Maybe this job isn't for you." Benjamin's eyes met hers, calm but piercing. He glanced around at the other HR staff. They looked away, feigning distraction. No one intervened. No one stopped her. With a polite nod, Benjamin turned his wheelchair toward the exit. He rolled away slowly, each movement deliberate. The lobby noise seemed to fade as he neared the door, but his mind was racing. He had seen enough. He had learned more than he'd expected. As he reached the exit, a small, knowing smile crossed his face. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. He hadn't come to leave quietly. This was a test, and Cheryl had failed spectacularly. The HR staff, complicit in their silence, had shown him everything he needed to know. Brightview had a problem, and now Benjamin had the evidence to fix it. The true weight of leadership wasn't just about profits or growth. It was about culture, about people. And Benjamin was ready to ensure that the values on paper matched the reality in the office. This story was far from over. It was just about to begin. Benjamin stepped back from the podium, allowing David's words to resonate through the room. The silence that followed was heavy, each employee feeling the weight of what had just been revealed. Cheryl's face had drained of color, her confident, smug demeanor now replaced with a mixture of disbelief and fear. She shifted in her seat, her hands fidgeting nervously, as though she could shrink away from the spotlight that had landed squarely on her. Benjamin's eyes met hers once more, calm but piercing. He wasn't going to let her off the hook easily, not because of personal vendetta, but because the culture he intended to foster at Brightview demanded accountability. He gestured subtly, and his assistant Jake stepped forward, handing him a folder. "I want to take this opportunity," Benjamin began again, voice steady but firm, "to emphasize the importance of our values. Values that go beyond mission statements and into the core of our daily operations. This folder contains notes from my experience today, but more importantly, it highlights the need for immediate changes." The employees watched with rapt attention as he opened the folder, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. Cheryl's colleagues couldn't meet his eyes. They knew what was coming. Each of them had been complicit in their silence. Cheryl Dixon," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made the room feel even smaller, "demonstrated today what we must root out from our culture: prejudice, assumptions, and lack of respect." She judged an applicant, someone she thought was powerless, based purely on appearance. Worse, no one intervened. Cheryl's head dropped, her face pale. Her colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, feeling the weight of their complicity. The silence in the room was suffocating. "This isn't about one person," Benjamin continued. "It's about all of us. It's about what we stand for and how we represent this company to the world. Every interaction matters. Every judgment you make reflects on Brightview Solutions. We can't afford to let prejudice go unchecked." He paused, letting his words sink in. The employees shifted in their seats, the uncomfortable truth settling over them like a heavy blanket. Benjamin's calm gaze moved from one face to another, ensuring they felt the weight of his message. Cheryl finally lifted her head, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Mr. Harris, she started, voice trembling, but Benjamin raised his hand, cutting her off gently. "This isn't about apologies, Cheryl," he said. "It's about actions. Words can be hollow, but behavior tells the real story. I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to set a standard. We all have biases, but it's our responsibility to confront them, not act on them." Murmur of agreement spread through the room. Some employees nodded, others looked down, ashamed. Cheryl's shoulders sagged, the reality of her behavior crashing over her. "I'm implementing new mandatory training programs," Benjamin announced. "They'll focus on inclusivity, unconscious bias, and fostering a culture of respect. And make no mistake, participation will not be optional." David stepped forward again, his presence reinforcing Benjamin's authority. "This company was built on values of innovation and integrity," he added. "Today, we saw how far we still have to go, but this is a chance to grow, to become the kind of organization we can all be proud of." Benjamin nodded in agreement. Effective immediately, an internal review will examine not just Cheryl's actions, but the response, or lack thereof, from others. Accountability isn't a buzzword here, it's a promise. Benjamin took one last look around, his voice softening but still firm. I'm here to work with you, not against you. Together, we'll build a bright view that lives up to its name, a place where talent, respect, and integrity shine brightest. As Benjamin walked off the stage, Jake whispered, "Think they got the message, sir?" Benjamin nodded, a slight smile on his lips. "They will." And with that, the real work began. As Cheryl's footsteps faded down the hallway, Benjamin took a deep breath, letting the silence settle. The air in the room felt charged, the gravity of what had just happened hanging heavily between the two brothers. David leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on Benjamin. "You handled that well," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But this is only the beginning." Benjamin nodded, his gaze thoughtful as he looked out the window. "It's not just about Cheryl, it's about what she represents. If that kind of behavior was happening on hiring day, who knows where else it's creeping in?" He turned to face David, his expression resolute. "We need to ensure this never happens again." David's brow furrowed. "What do you have in mind?" "An overhaul," Benjamin replied. "I want a full audit of our hiring practices, not just on paper but in practice. We need to get feedback from candidates and employees alike, anonymous surveys, direct interviews, whatever it takes to uncover the truth." David raised an eyebrow. "That's a tall order. It could ruffle some feathers." Benjamin smiled, a hint of steel behind it. "Good. Let 'em rustle. If people are uncomfortable with accountability, they're not the kind of people we want here." David nodded slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're going to shake things up, aren't you?" "From the ground up," Benjamin agreed. "We need to foster a culture where respect and integrity aren't just words on a poster. They need to be lived values." At that moment, Jake knocked and entered the office holding a tablet. "Sir, the team's waiting for you in the conference room. They want to hear about your vision moving forward." The conference room was packed, the atmosphere a mix of tension and anticipation. Cheryl's abrupt departure had sent ripples through the company, and everyone knew something big was coming. As Benjamin and David entered, the room fell silent. Every eye was on them. Benjamin took his place at the head of the table, his presence commanding but approachable. "I'm sure you all know why we're here," he began, his voice steady. "Today wasn't just about welcoming a new CEO. It was a test of our values and the culture we've built." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And we've failed." A murmur swept through the room, a few faces paling. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others stared at their hands. No one dared to interrupt. "Failure isn't always a bad thing," Benjamin continued. "It's a chance to learn, to grow. But only if we face it head-on." He looked around the table, his gaze steady. "Starting today, we're implementing changes. Real changes." He outlined his plan: mandatory bias and inclusivity training for all employees, anonymous reporting systems for workplace behavior, and regular audits to ensure compliance with company values. He emphasized these weren't just formalities, they were necessities. "This isn't just about avoiding bad press or ticking boxes," Benjamin said, his voice rising with conviction. "It's about creating a workplace where everyone feels valued and respected, where no one is dismissed because of how they look or what limitations others assume they have." A woman from the marketing team raised her hand. "Mr. Harris, what happens if someone's behavior doesn't align with these values?" Benjamin's eyes met hers. "They'll be held accountable, just like today, no exceptions." The room was silent again, but this time it was different. There was no tension, only a sense of determination. They understood the stakes. David stepped forward. "This is our chance to rebuild," he said, his voice strong. to make Brightview Solutions a leader, not just in technology, but in how we treat people. We have the talent, the vision, and now the mandate. Benjamin nodded. It won't be easy, change never is, but I believe in this team. I believe in what we can achieve together. As the meeting concluded, employees left the room with a renewed sense of purpose. The energy was palpable. Conversations buzzed in hushed tones, but they were different now. Focused, reflective. Jake approached Benjamin as the room emptied. "That was powerful," he said. "Do you think they'll follow through?" Benjamin's gaze was steady. "They will, because they know we're watching, and because they know what's at stake." He glanced out the window, the city skyline sprawling beneath the setting sun. This was just the beginning, but it felt like a turning point. The real work was ahead, but for the first time, it felt possible. Benjamin knew that change wasn't just about policies or procedures. It was about people. And today, Brightview Solutions had taken its first step toward becoming the company it was always meant to be.